One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Okay, cool. So today's plan, we are going to be painting the Grave Wraith. This fella from Reaper Miniatures. You can get him in metal, you can get him in bones. He's a great figure. There's links to it down below. He comes with these cool little extra gravestones. You can put them on separate bases. I put them all together on one base to make a little scene. It's very cool. This guy also comes in a kit. The Learn to Paint Quick Paint Grave Wraith. And that's a fun little kit. It's got everything you need. It's got paints, the paintbrush, the miniature, as well as a little instruction booklet on how to paint it using beginner techniques. And that's by Rhonda Bender. Comes this little brush. Figure and instructions, and we are going to paint along the instructions and talk about how it works and all that kind of good stuff. So the paints we're going to use today, you don't have to use these paints. Pretty much anything similar is going to work. So solid black, aged bone, olive drab. You could use kind of any desaturated dark green, blade steel. Again, any metallic, which is kind of doesn't have to be a dark metallic. You can add black to it to darken it down. And then our glow color is going to be 9416 Spectral Glow. That's what's in the kit anyway. But you could use a whole variety of different colors and get a similar effect. Like you could use Jade Green, you could use Phantom Glow, you could use LED Blue, you could even use Runic Glow or something like that if you want a cyberpunk looking sort of ghost. So I am going to use similar paints, not identical paints, but pretty darn close. I'm going to use solid black, hone steel, phantom glow, aged bone, and olive drab to get my guide done. The reason I'm doing that is that way the kit is available to somebody else, beginner or something like that, if they want to pick up a kit. Same with the brush. I won't use their brush today. I'm going to save that for somebody else. All right. So we got our paints, we got our instructions, and the core techniques today really are base coating and dry brushing. And we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different things about dry brushing as we go. Just a friendly reminder that if you are watching on Twitch, that you could also go over and watch on the Discord. I'll put the link to the Discord here. And you're always welcome to watch on the Discord. If you're painting along with us, painting at the same time, then you're welcome to drop your photos into the chat on that Discord channel, and if you need any help or have any questions, just ask me and we can address that as we go. So I see we had our first question there from Zox2277. He was curious to know what I think of the brush, and the brush, that particular brush for this is not really the best brush. It's good for doing, it's a good general miniature painting brush, but if you're going to dry brush, you need something that you don't mind wrecking. And that brush is pretty, it's pretty small and pretty narrow. That sounds like the same thing, but it's a sort of this shape of brush, right? It's a round, and quite often if you're dry brushing, you want something which is also small but maybe flat, a little bit bigger, So not just a narrow brush, narrow small brush, sometimes a flat, slightly larger brush. And let's just talk about dry brushes right now. There are a lot of different possible dry brushes out there. You can buy specialty made dry brushes, you get all kinds of different things. And here's some of the stuff that I've been using. Okay, I'll use these as dry brushes. So mostly I work with makeup brushes. So that's going to be things like these. Okay, and these are just plastic handle makeup brushes from pharmacy. This set, I think, was described as an eye set. So the brushes were smaller, a little bit softer. This one was from a general makeup kit, and it's got that nice little kind of bevel to it. This one is natural bristle as well, which was interesting. These ones are all synthetic, but they all work in a similar way. We've also got, this is the Army Painter, the new Army Painter Masterclass dry brushes. It comes in a set of three, with 3 natural bristle dry brushes, a small, medium, and a large. I think they're ox hair. It's not completely clear to me what kind of bristle these are, but they work nearly identically to the Artis Opus ones. The Artis Opus ones are just nicer bristle and built a little better. These ones, the ferrule is really close to the tip, so you run the risk, if you're a beginner, you run the risk of pushing too hard and chiseling your miniature with the edge of the metal ferrule, and that's partly because the bristle's not packed in very densely, whereas the packaging overall with the Artis Opus ones, which are a lot more expensive, the Artis Opus ones are packaged, like the bristles are packed in there a little bit better, and you run less risk of hitting with the ferrule if you're just kind of learning the technique. All right, so those are, we'll try different ones today and see how it goes. I'm also just going to use my regular old round synthetic brushes. I do like larger brushes. I'll probably be using a size 3, size 4, something like that today. That's my plan. Anyway, and there's, like I said, there's the mini. So you get a sense of how big a brush I'm going to use. Not too difficult. All right, so let's go look at the overall instructions that Rhonda, this is written by Rhonda Bender, and it's a pretty straightforward technique. We are going to apply a base coat on each of the different objects, and then we are going to make our own washes and apply some washes, and then we are going to dry brush. We're going to dry brush the base colors back over, and then we are going to create the glow by dry brushing on the spectral glow color in slightly progressively lighter layers of glow. Pretty straightforward. So let's start by doing our base coats. First thing we're going to need is black. That's going to be for our robes. Let's get a big dollop of black on there. And we are going to need the aged bone color. This is for the skull. Apparently the gravestones are aged bone as well. That's interesting. I guess they can only put 5 paints in the kit, so they have a limited palette to work from. The grass, I don't really have any grass on mine, but I guess we'll make the grass olive drab. We'll make the base color olive drab anyway. Unless this paint is empty, which it appears to be. Ooh, that's real good and dried up. Very dried up paint. Nice. We'll work with it anyway. Not going to hurt anything. Just starts out very thick, and we'll thin it as we go. And then we need to base coat our honed steel. Or what's that color? Blade steel. And I'm using honed steel. They're very similar colors. There we go. Now a little bit about base coating. Now I've used an airbrush to put a first coat of paint on these, and then did a zenithal highlight with a lighter color of the airbrush to make all the details stand out. But if you're starting with the black figure, that's totally fine. So for the first coat, the black base coat, I'm going to get a little bit of water just in this solid black with a little bit of water. It's a high density pigment paint. High pigment density paint, and it's a little bit thicker. So just give it a little bit of water to thin it. You could also use an acrylic medium, something like that, to thin them as well. See another question there about how do I clean my dry brushes. I don't take very good care of them, really. I quite often forget that I've used them and leave them full of paint. But the main thing, wipe them clean. Do your best to get as much paint out of them as possible. And then periodically I use my Master's soap, brush cleaning soap, and give them a really thorough deep cleaning. Especially the bristle one. I use the Master's soap to clean them, because that softens the dried paint that's in them and cleans them out. When I was doing a lot more, I do less dry brushing now than I ever have. But when I do dry brush a lot of metallics, I'll tend to reserve one of the dry brushes to be for metallics, either gold or for silver, because it is really hard to get all the particles out of them. So you do tend to get metallic paints showing up at them when you switch to other colors. So I tend to keep one for metallics, or one for gold, one for silver, and then the other brushes for other things. The main thing I use dry brushes for these days is actually painting terrain. Yeah, that's a good observation. If you fully dunk them in the water, the pigment goes right up inside the handle, and it can be very difficult to clean out. And I too have made the mistake of leaving these brushes soaking, and I actually left mine soaking in brush cleaner by mistake. And when I came back the next day and realized my mistake, the brush cleaner had dissolved the glue and dissolved the handles of the brushes. That was with the other 5 of this set, and they just totally disintegrated. And yeah, it was kind of disappointing because I like those dry brushes. So yeah, I do try to avoid fully immersing them, and when I clean them, I tend to use the brush soap as opposed to like soaking them in cleaner. I noticed that these Army Painter ones, there's a long distance between the end of the bristle and the ferrule. I'm gonna have to break one of these open one day just to see how long the bristles really are, how far back they go. Okay, so I'm just slapping on this all-around base coat of black, not being super careful about it. And also discovering, as I suspected, that the gravestones are going to be in the way a little bit when I go to do the dry brushing on this. But, oh well. I'll work around it. So we'll do a black base coat, and then we'll do our other base coats. Don't know if I'll need to do a second coat of black or not. I probably won't. That zenithal highlight that I did with my airbrush really seems to have, the black paint seems to be sticking to it really, really well, showing a little bit of detail through. And I'm planning to dry brush lighter colors over the top of it anyway. It was already darker in all the crevices, so I don't really feel like I need a second coat, but it's totally up to you. If you feel like it's not dark enough, you can always put on a second coat. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to let it dry and then come back to it in a few minutes and see if I missed any spots, and then touch those up. Okay, I'm hearing beeping from the other channel. Let's see what's going on over there. I was mistaken. Okay. Aged bone is what we're doing next. So the next thing we're going to paint is the skull. What skull are we? Oh, there's a skull on the base. That's what we're talking about. Okay, so we'll paint the bones in the hand and the skull on the base with this aged bone color. Don't worry if it's not super neat, because we're going to put a dark colored wash over all of this, and that will help tidy up any slight mistakes. I'm going to do the bones on the hand. Yeah, so this kit is, you can buy this online from Reaper's online store. It's a good little kit. And these days I find that the shipping is really prohibitively expensive on the big starter kits, the layer up starter kits. So these days I'm just bringing in these smaller kits because they're more manageable, cost less to ship. They're quite a bit smaller. Just too bad. I really like the layer up kit. I think it's one of the best beginner kits out there. All right, so I'm starting to paint the silver, and just this silver is a little bit runny and a little bit too much on my brush. It ran onto the black a little bit. So what I'm doing with the silver, I'm just putting a little bit on the brush. Oh, there we go. Putting a little bit on the brush, rolling it, making sure it's not too overloaded, and then I'll come back and painting the sword hilt at the moment, and just want to avoid having a lot of paint run down into the onto the cloak. Metallic paints can be hard to cover up sometimes, so better to be a little bit careful and avoid mistakes if we can. But at the end of the day, most of this guy's black, so if you get the metallic in the wrong place, then you can always just go back and paint him black again and put a couple of coats of black over it, and that'll cover the silver right up. I'm getting much more used to these Bones USA and Bones Black minis. I do still find it frustrating to try to clean up the mold lines on them. The plastic is really not very user-friendly. I still prefer pewter overall as of all the Reaper minis or types of material that Reaper's using, I personally prefer the pewter. But I've been painting some of the 3D prints lately, though, and the 3D prints are beautiful. I'm really amazed about how nice they are. So I'm looking forward to painting more of those as they become more common. Alright, so gravestones are going to get this same aged bone color. Slightly thin that down a little bit. This has a lot of little crevices on the gravestone, so I want the paint to get in there. I probably will have to do 2 coats of this. I will just do 2 coats of everything anyway. Follow Rhonda's instructions to the letter, shall we? Of course, I'm already using different paints than what she has in the kit, and I'm going to be using a different kind of brush from the one that's in the kit. The kits are a good start point, but if you already have preferences, I mean, you don't have to follow exactly what the kit tells you to do. If all you own is the kit, that's what you bought to start with, then you'll be fine just following the exact directions that she gives and using the exact paint that she gives. I think one thing that I would recommend doing a little bit differently is just paint everything with an unthinned coat of paint first. Don't try to thin the paint with water at all. If you put any water at all in the paint and then try to paint directly onto the plastic, it's a bit hydrophobic, so the water beads up on the surface and the paint doesn't stick very well. So if you're just going straight onto the plastic, try to paint the first coat of paint without using any water to thin. And trying to figure out what color to paint to start with. You could just base coat the way Rhonda's describing, or what you might also do is take the aged bone and the black and mix them together. Don't thin it at all, just mix them together to get a dirty gray color, and paint the whole figure with that color to start with, and then go ahead and paint your base coats afterwards. A lot of people do something similar and use a color called brown liner. Paint the whole thing with brown liner. I'm talking about starting out painting their bones figures. Start with a brown liner and then go ahead and paint afterwards. And the brown liner is so dark, it makes like a shadow effect on everything it touches. It's not a bad color to start with. Okay, so we've got gravestones painted aged bone. We need to do the grass olive drab. I don't have any grass, I covered mine, but here we go. So what do I do with this very thick paint? I'm going to add just a bit of Flow Improver medium. This is Liquitex Flow Aid. And where that paint has dried up quite a bit, but it's not really turning solid. I think it's just the medium is evaporated, or maybe the water is I don't know what's going on there, but it's just thickened, right? It's still functioning as paint. Still looks pretty good. So I'm just going to thin it a little bit with a Flow Improver and carry on. I think I've had these paints for a long time. You can tell by the packaging that's pretty faded. Yeah. All right, so we're going to paint all the base stuff, the grass, everything like that, with the olive drab. Now where I've added a lot of gravel to my base, it's going to be harder for the paint to get in there, so I'm going to thin it quite a bit, both with water and Flow Improver actually, to get it to flow into the rocks. There we go. It's kind of a wet, unpleasant day here today in Halifax. We had freezing rain overnight, so there was a crust of frozen ice and snow and everything this morning. Good spring weather. It's warmed up a little bit and the snow is mostly gone, but it's still kind of a nasty, gray, drizzly day out there. So notice I'm not really like doing long, smooth brush strokes here. I'm just kind of dabbing the paint on, and that's because the sand that I put on the base, natural sand, it's going to tear up the brush pretty badly. If I try to dry brush it with this brush, or just kind of do long brush strokes, because it's so rough, it'll just tear up the brush. So I'm just kind of dabbing the paint on there. That's the job. It'll work just fine. There we go. So now I think we've got all of our base coats on. Okay, so Rhonda says you don't need primer. Apply one coat is fast, but 2 coats will look better. So apply 2 thin coats. She doesn't say 2 thin coats. She just says apply 2 coats. So we're going to do 2 coats. Let's do another coat of each of these colors. All right, so this is our second coat of black, mostly done. Actually, the conditions are really good for painting today. The humidity is really good, and everything is drying very quickly. but not so quickly that I'm having a hard time. And there we go. So that's our 2 base coats done. Oh, I didn't do the base coat. Second coat on the grass. Let's do that now. Once again, I'm not doing long, smooth brush strokes because of the gravel that I've put on the base. I don't want to damage the brush. All right, there we go. Looking pretty good. Now the next step is to make washes. And how do you make washes? Well, you can either buy a chemical wash, or you can just do it the easy way, which is to put a little bit of water into the paint to make it really, really thin. So let's take a little bit of this olive drab paint. It's the first one we're going to do. I'll move that down to the bottom of the palette here. And I'm going to add quite a bit of water on that. So it's probably, Rhonda says 50-50 water and paint, like 1 drop of paint for 1 drop of water. I'm going to have a little bit more water than that in mine. And then you take your brush, load it up with that paint. Here's the consistency of it. You can see it's not very thick. And then you take the brush and go slowly over the shape that you want the paint to go into. So we're going to do this over the bones on the hand. And we just ride the brush slowly across there. And the paint slowly runs out of the bristles into the low spots on the object. And we'll do that on the back of the hand as well. Don't need a huge amount of paint. Why do you go slow? Because if you go fast, you don't really give time for the paint to flow into the recesses. And that's what this is all about, is we're filling in the recesses with this darker color. I'm going to do it on the skull on the base now. There we go. So there's that one. And now next we are going to make a wash of black. So we're going to take a little bit of solid black. I'm going to mix a whole bunch of water into it. Once again, Rhonda's saying 1 drop of black, 2 drops of water in this case. So this is going to be a thinner mix. And we're going to do the same approach. There's how thick it is, okay? And we're going to run that over everything that we didn't put the other wash over. So that's going to be the sword, gravestones, and the base. I'm going to start down here on the pommel. Just go over that slowly, let the black sink in. And then we'll do it over the top of the sword blade. And initially it may look a little too thick as you go. Just as it dries though, it's going to fade a little bit. If it's so thick that you can't see any silver showing out from underneath, that's a little bit more challenging. And if you obscure, but it's not like putting a thick coat of paint on that's unthinned. It's not going to fill in the details and make them solid. It just might make them a little bit harder to see. And if that happens, all you do, go back, paint the silver back, and do it with a thinner wash. There's another route, which we're going to do in a little while. We are going to dry brush to bring out the detail, and that'll work as well. Okay, so let's keep going. Do all the gravestones with the black. Same idea, we'll go slowly. It's time for that paint to run into the low spots. There we go. Worked reasonably well, and now I do the same thing all across the base. I don't really have enough wash for that. I'm going to make it a little bit more wash, because the base I've made is quite a bit bigger than the one that comes with the model. Let's do this. Okay, and then I'll slowly run the brush across. See if you can see the difference. If I go quick versus if I go slow. It definitely fills in the details better when you go slowly. Let's just double check. Nope. Thought I had heard somebody asking a question on the Discord channel. Okay. Let's do the metallic first. That seems to be the one I'm making the mistakes with. Put less paint on there than I used the first time. It's worked reasonably well. All right. There's a base coat of the metallics done. Now I'm going to do the bone. We'll do the hand first. Skull on the base. And then all the gravestones again. Too thin coats in a lot of miniature painting discussions has become a little bit of a joke, but it really is a certainly when you're learning, it's a very good approach to get used to how to get a smooth base coat, and also how to thin the paint so that it flows smoothly and so you don't obscure all the details on the miniature you're painting. So every time somebody says something about, what do you mean too thin coats, ha ha, just remember, it works. It's a really good technique. Sometimes you need more than 2 thin coats. Sometimes it takes 5, 6, 7 coats. Depends on the color you're trying to put one color over the other. And some very translucent, transparent pigments, it can be very difficult to get nice, smooth, opaque base coat with good coverage. And multiple thin coats is one way to solve the problem. It's a very good way to solve the problem. Other way to solve the problem is to put something underneath those colors as a foundation so that when you apply them they function correctly. But that's actually something we've looked at many times in the other, I don't know, 15 paint-alongs that we've done so far, is putting on a base coat or an underpainted color that's going to give a good foundation to make our other colors look good. Alright, so now I'm going to do another coat of black. I'm going to thin this again. So if you're a total beginner and this is your first painting kit and you're trying to figure out what I'm doing here, the first thing I just mentioned is the wet palette. The palette is a sponge. Okay, so there's a sponge underneath, and there's water in that. That's a reservoir of water. And this is just regular cooking parchment, not wax paper, cooking parchment. You put that over the top of the sponge, and the sponge feeds water through the parchment into the paint. So it keeps the paint from drying out quite as fast while you're working with it. Really useful tool. And if you're not already using a wet palette, you should start. And not all paints behave the same on a wet palette. Metallic paints in particular don't really work that well on a wet palette because the reflective part of the paint tends to kind of fall out of suspension and get very globby and gross on the wet palette. And some wash paints, like the Games Workshop type shades, Army Painter shades, that sort of thing, they don't react all that well to have a lot of water, having a lot of water added to them. So they tend to not do particularly well on the wet palette. Just about every other paint is going to be all right. Acrylic paints, I mean, specifically. You don't want to put oil paints or enamels or anything like that onto your wet palette because you don't thin those with water, so don't put those on your wet palette. A lot of companies also make technical paints. I mean, like contrast paints, speed washes, things like that, and they tend not to do as well on the wet palette. Thank you there, Tea Light Trees. I didn't realize that the mic was still off. My apologies for that. So, to back up, how much of that did we miss? All the dry brushing, probably, right? Darn it. Let's take a look. Yeah, all the dry brushing bit. Oh well, just keep going. That's the way it goes. So, what I had just done was added a little bit of the blue, the Phantom Glow color into the olive green to make a green that I dry brushed over the grass. So we're gonna do we'll do the next steps with this. I'm gonna do, so the next step is to dry brush the mixture of black and Phantom Glow. So I'm making more black and Phantom Glow. And previously I had 1 drop of black, 1 drop of Phantom Glow. Now I'm going to mix 2 drops effectively of Phantom Glow into the black to make the mix lighter. Mix a lot of it off, and I'm wiping it off on a wet paper towel so that it doesn't totally dry out my brush. Give it a little test on my hand. That's still a little bit too much paint on there. I'm going to go very, very lightly. Okay. And as before, I'm going to go across the texture, not parallel to the texture, for the same reasons as before. If you go parallel, you get paint everywhere. When you go across, you only catch the raised surfaces. So I'm going to start up by his head, and I'm going to work my way down and across. I am looking at the wrong screen. That's why it looks so weird. There we go. Back on the right screen. I'm trying to keep it centered, and when I move the figure, it goes in the opposite direction. Okay, so I'm going to start by his head and work my way outwards. Going across the texture and being very, very light. And you can see the details are starting to appear much better now. And as I said earlier, if I had just dry brushed the glow color straight onto the black, it wouldn't work as well. But the Phantom Glow is already present. Or what am I? Yeah, Phantom Glow, or the Spectral Glow color, is already present in the black. So it just slightly increases the amount of blue, and it just lightly shows up. And it doesn't look like a big mess. It's a very similar idea to layering. You're just, instead of doing layers with a regular brush, you're just lightly adding partly dried pigment with the dry brushing technique. There we go. Turn it around. Same thing on the other side. Do it a little bit too heavy. Let's go a bit lighter. So key thing is, like a lot of people say, wipe most all the paint off, and that's all very good. The key really is being patient and just very, very light brush strokes, and be patient to wait for the color to slowly build up. When you rush it, you end up with a big, powdery, ugly mess. Just go slow, and you get a good result. Even with too much paint on the brush. light brush strokes, you're still going to get a pretty good result. Okay, there we go. He's showing it pretty well. Do you have any thoughts on the slap chop method? I do. I think it's awesome. Any painting technique that gets people moving, gets people trying to paint, and thinking about light and light direction is a good thing. I'm not super fan of dry brushing in general, but it's a good foundation technique to be aware of. And you know, it's a gateway to doing other things. So yeah, I don't have any objection to it. And yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. Okay, so the next thing I want to do a little bit of the blue glow on the gravestones too. Now Rhonda doesn't say to do this in the instructions, but I kind of feel like doing it. So I'm going to take a little bit of the bone and add a little bit of the spectral glow into it. Just a little bit. And this is not going to look quite right because the aged bone is a lighter color than the spectral glow. And by adding the two together, I've actually darkened the aged bone. So when I dry brush on, I'm dry brushing a darker color onto a lighter color. So that's going to look a little bit weird, but I'll fix it by doing a second dry brush with a lighter color afterwards. So I'm going to load up the brush with this color, smoosh it around, wipe it off on my wet paper towel a little bit. You can see it's a pretty light color. Right on. That's cool to hear. All right, so this is for the gravestones. And remember, I was trying to make the light look like it comes from him. So I'm just going to lightly apply this on the edges of the gravestone closest to the specter or the graveyard wraith. Same thing on this one. Just lightly apply it on the edges closest to the ghostly dude. There we go. I like what that's doing. It's adding a little bit of a ghostly look to the gravestones as well, and I'm liking that look. I like it. So I think maybe I don't have to do. No, I do. I need to do a slightly lighter dry brush on all those now. So I'm going to add I'm putting a lighter color in the palette. This is creamy ivory. I just want to add a touch of a lighter color into this bone mix. And this is just going to lighten it just the tiniest amount. Like that. And now this will help those edges look a little bit more like the light is coming from the guy. So I'm going to go away from him very, very lightly, really aiming for the bits closest. Yeah, this is exactly what I want. Compare how the definition of this one is compared to that one. Okay, just that little bit of extra light paint has really made a little difference. There we go. Okay, there we go. I like it. Yeah, I mean, some people don't like non-metallic metal. Some people don't like object source lighting. Some people don't like, a variety of different techniques. And, they say negative things about it. And as far as I'm concerned, any painting that you do is good. Because there's the only way to get better at miniature painting is to miniature paint. So any technique, anything that gets you motivated to paint, that has you working, putting paint on the miniature, you're learning your tools, you're learning your paints, and you're going to get better. And that's always good, in my opinion. All right, so the next step is to do a gentle dry brush of spectral glow on the Wraith's robes in small areas on the top of the larger cloth folds and the frayed edges. So I'm going to guess that's around his head and on some of these curves of cloth to kind of bring out his shape a bit. So I'm going to do something along that way, around the hood of the cowl, and on that hand to sort of define his shape a little bit better. So just a little bit of spectral glow on the brush. Same as before, I'm going to work it into the bristles, but then also wipe most of it off. My paper towel to the side of the palette now is really quite damp. So by wiping that on the brush on that now, I'm not really drying it out very much. And you can see how it's working. It's just really picking out the raised details. You can see it's just like picking out the wrinkles in my skin. That's what we want. And we want this to be a very, very light touch. I think this zone is the easiest one to do. And I think I'll do it on the back first, where people are less likely to look directly at it. So I'm going to start up by the sword hand. Oh, still too heavy. That's why I did a test at the back. Too much paint still. Let's get rid of some of this. There we go. And now we'll do... There we go. That's what I wanted. Just really, really lightly. Let it build up slowly. I'll work my way down along these bristles, or these ragged edges of the cloak, making them a little bit more visible. Really, really lightly. How light is really, really lightly? Well, it's one really more than really lightly. Not a very useful measure of pressure. Just suffice it to say that if you push too hard, you end up scraping off the paint from previous layers, which is really not what we want. Just want to catch the edges lightly. And now that I'm kind of familiar with how much pressure I want, I'll do the front. I'll do the front of the cowl first. Across the shoulder. And then this sort of hand shape. My way down there. And then this line across the front here to sort of define the shape. All right, there we go. Very creepy. Pretty happy with that. Now, if you wanted to, you could go one step further and lighten him even further. I personally feel like the bone in his hand, and the bone of the skull don't show up all that well. So I'm going to take that little brush I was using, and I'm going to mix aged bone with that light creamy ivory color just a little bit. Wipe most of it off. And I'm going to very lightly pick out like the knuckle bones on his hand. Make those shapes stand out a little bit better. Make them look a little bonier. Same thing at the back. Yeah, I like this kit. This is a really good start point. Can't say I'm a huge fan of the idea of trying to do all of this with this tiny little brush. But something to use as a dry brush is fairly easy to locate. There. You could even make that skull glow blue if we wanted to. Not going to do that today. I'm going to darken the pits of his eyes a bit though. I think they tried a little bit too light, so let's darken those up. Yeah, I'm happy with that. And I do feel like his sword could use a little bit. So this is, I mean, we're done according to the instructions in Rhonda's kit, and I quite like where this has gotten us. I'm going to take it a little bit further though, I think. I do want to lighten up the metallic on the sword blade, make it look a little bit more creepy. Not creepy, more dangerous. So I'm going to add some lighter paint into that silver. Lighten that up a little bit. Wipe most of the paint off. And then so this small dry brush, I'm just going to very lightly pick out some of the details of the sword with that lighter color. Make it a little bit better defined. There's a gem there you could paint as well if you were keen. I'll do the same thing on the edges of all those letters on the blade. You could always make those glowing letters too if we were feeling that way. Just running the brush across the texture again to catch the raised bits, bring out the shapes. And let's do that right across the front edge of that blade, make it look sharp. Just run the lengthwise like that. There we go. I like it. What else can we do with this guy now? We could do some rust. Let's do some rust. I'm going to grab ruddy leather. This is going to be one of my two rust colors. Oops, put 10 times too much of it on the palette. Get it all over my hands. And Reaper has a really good rust color. It's called Rust Orange. There it is, Rust Brown. That'll be the other rust color. So what am I going to do? I'm going to take my little brush here. I'm going to put a little bit of this orange paint on the brush. There's the orange paint. I'm going to make little dots and dabs of it. So I want to avoid doing this on any like raised surfaces. I'm going to do it kind of along the edge of shadows. Let's see if I can get a better focus here. So like this sword hilt. Not on the most raised areas, just outside of them. We're going to add some orange. A little bit in the bottom of this hilt along there. Little crevice there. A little bit along the blade. Little dabs and dashes. Work we way out along the blade. Remember what I said about a dark orange in the shadows on this guy? Well, what we're doing here is going to make the blue look better. Okay, just work our way along the blade a little bit. Just little dits and dabs, not too much, just a little bit. And we'll do that on the other side of the blade as well. Go. And on the back. Okay, there's a bit of rust on both sides of the blade. Not sure why that will not. Doesn't look very focused. I mean, I know it doesn't look focused on these because I'm blind as a bat. But, okay. So then the second color that I put on the palette, that darker color, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put little dots and dabs of the darker color over top of the light orange. And that's just to kind of dull it back down a bit. That rust orange can look a bit bright and saturated. And this is going to make it look a little bit more rust-like. So anywhere that I've done an orange dot, I'm going to put this darker color sort of in and around the center, the edges of those dots. Break up their shape a little bit. Anywhere that I got a really bright concentration of orange, I want to break it up with this other color. And that's going to make it look more like a natural rust effect. Other side of the blade, the same thing. There we go. Very rusty and dusty. Okay. Now I want to go one layer lighter. So I'm going to take that Phantom Glow or Spectral Glow, whichever color you're using. And on the small brush, barely any paint on the small brush. Okay, I'm going to do just a little bit more on the raised curves and jagged edges with this smaller brush. Now, using this tiny little brush to do this, is going to take 10 times as long as it did with the big dry brush. Okay, but the same principles apply. Very, very light brush strokes. Don't have too much paint. Go across the texture, not with the texture, and try not to just be patient. Let the color build up slowly. There we go. To the hood. Lightly is the key. What do you do if you put on too much, if you go too heavy? Well, you can just grab a color which is slightly darker and then go back and darken it up again. What would that look like? Let's do it. Let's make a mistake. Oop. There, that's way too much. Okay, so now what I do, so this was my earlier, this is what I'm using right now, straight Phantom Glow. If I go back to a slightly darker color, and I can use that to darken things up again. So there's my thing which was too light. So I just dab and dot this over top of the area that I made too light, break up its outline, and then I can come back in, give it a second shot more lightly. So that's basically disappeared now into the background again compared to the other light areas, and now I can go and give it a second shot. Extifer, I see your comment about the new Lion L. Johnson model. The Primark is it's a pretty darn cool looking model. Yeah, it's a cool model. Although I do find it does look a little bit much like that actor from Game of Thrones. But it's a very cool figure. Well sculpted. Good design. Okay, so we'll just do this one lighter than last time so we don't have to fix it again. And the aim is to just pick out the details on the ragged edge of the cloak. Give our spectral guy here a little bit more of an identifiable shape. I don't really have a favorite Primark. I've painted a bunch of them, and I'm painting Rogel Dorn right now, and that's a very nice model too. I don't know, I like them all. I don't remember what the last one I painted was. It was the Iron Warriors guy. Alright, there we go. Brought those shapes out just a little bit more. I'm pretty happy with that. I like the way that looks. I'm comfortable calling that a finished model. Alright, so that was it. Dry brushing. The Grave Spectre, Grave Wraith. What's he called again? The Grave Wraith. Let's compare him to the box art. Well, he doesn't have a fancy red glow like the one in the box art, but he does have the same overall look as the bit in the middle. Quite happy with that. And again, this, you could treat this as just a start point and then just keep refining and refining and refining the details until you end up with a model to enter into ReaperCon and all that good stuff. And the last thing I'm going to do, and then I'm going to call them done, I'm going to paint the rim of the base black. Because always. Don't question it. Just do it. Paint the rim of the base black. I think if I was to refine this model further, I'd do a little bit more detail work on the gravestones. I would add some dead bushes, dead plants and things, maybe some vines around the base, around the gravestones. And I would definitely go in with a darker orange color and deepen some of those shadows even further with a deeper, darker red-orange, something like that. All right, there he is, the Grave Wraith. Done.